What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for Upset Alert Week 8. This is where we take the 8 games that we think are most likely to be upsets. And to be an upset, the spread has to be 4 points or more. If it's less than that, it's really not an upset. Those are basically pick'em games. Looking back at last week, there were 2 games that we had on the 8 games, and that's usually what happens. Usually 2 or 3 of these games wind up being upsets. Tennessee upset Alabama. Michigan State upset Wisconsin. Those were the 2. I did not have it as part of my 8 picks last week, but I talked about Notre Dame Stanford. I said if there was going to be a big upset, look for Stanford potentially to upset Notre Dame. That would have been like the 9th game for me if I had done 9 games instead of 8. I really had a feeling that that might be close and maybe even an upset, and it did turn out to be an upset. So a big one last week against Stanford over Notre Dame. But let's look ahead to Week 8. I think we're going to see a lot of upsets this week. You come off of a loaded schedule last week, so many big games, and then this week you look at the schedule, not quite as big. There are still some big games this week, though. A couple of really big ones, some games between undefeated teams, but it still doesn't feel as big as last weekend. But a lot of times when you come off of a big weekend like that, the next weekend something crazy happens. You see some big upsets or something. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if I see one like Notre Dame Stanford from last week where there's a spread of, I can't remember what the spread was. I know it was double digits, but I don't know if I see a huge one. If there's going to be a big upset, it's probably this first game, and that's Syracuse Clemson. This one is at noon Eastern time on ABC. Clemson's favored by 13.5 points, and I'm going from the least likely to most likely, in my opinion, upset to actually happen. So this is the least likely of the 8 games, but still, there's enough here to where I think this game could be interesting. Syracuse is a good football team. I mean, they are. And Clemson, they're starting to get it rolling, but we've still seen them play, seen inconsistency from Clemson. So how well will they play in this game? Will they play all 4 quarters? Will the offense show up? Will the defense show up? It's almost been like there's always been something missing this year from Clemson. And even so, they're still undefeated. That tells you how good this team is. But perhaps Syracuse comes in here fired up. They've done it before. Could happen again. If it was at Syracuse, I think it would be more likely. It's hard to imagine them going into Clemson and winning this game, but you never know. So that's the big one. If there's going to be a big upset, that's probably the one that's going to happen. How about Kansas and Baylor? This one's on ESPN2, noon Eastern time. Baylor favored by 8. Boy, Vegas just does not like Kansas. Poor Kansas. They start undefeated, then they're big underdogs against Oklahoma. Now they're underdogs against a 3-3 Baylor team. This Baylor team has proven this year that they're not as good as they were supposed to be. They're just not. You can keep thinking that Baylor's a top 25 team or whatever, but if you look at the games, you look at the results, this is not a great team. They're not bad. I don't mean they're a bad team, but Kansas is a good team, and so the Kansas is capable of winning this game. It'll be tough on the road. I understand why Baylor is favored. Surprised that it's all the way up at 8, but I do understand why Baylor is favored. I think this will be a close game, and Kansas could potentially pull off an upset. Who knows? That might even get them back into the top 25. Duke, Miami. This one's at 12:30 Eastern time. Miami's favored by 9, so I was surprised by this number as well. Miami has just not been a good team this year. It's just like with Baylor. You can keep thinking, yeah, they're going to get it figured out. This is still a good team, but they just have not been very good this year. Even last week, they had to hang on to win against a bad team. Duke is better than they were supposed to be. They're 4-3. They played North Carolina tough last week. This is a pretty good Duke team. I feel like this game is these teams have played pretty even so far this year. Miami's at home, so I would favor Miami, sure, but 9 points, that's a big number. I think this will be a 1-score game. And in 1-score games, one play, a turnover, a penalty, one little thing can change it, and Duke could potentially pull off an upset here on the road. How about West Virginia, Texas Tech? This one's at 3 Eastern time on FS1. Texas Tech favored by 7 at home against a pretty good West Virginia team. They've had their ups and downs this year. Texas Tech, kind of the same story. Both teams have looked like top 25 teams at times, and they've looked not so great at other times. So this is a toss-up. I mean, both teams 3-3. I understand, again, Texas Tech, they're at home. They should be favored in this game. But it's another game that should be close, and either team could really win it. So that'll be a good one there. An underrated game. Not many people are going to be watching this one or talking about this one. It'll probably be a really good one, though. All right, how about UCLA and Oregon? This one's at 3:30 Eastern time on Fox. Oregon favored by 6. It feels like this Oregon team has kind of turned the corner. They've gotten it together ever since the loss in week 1 to Georgia. They took care of business against BYU, went on the road, beat Washington State. They're playing really good football. But UCLA is also, they beat Washington, they beat Utah. They're 6-0. Dorian Thompson-Robinson's playing great. The defense is playing much better than I guess they have at any time under Chip Kelly. So this is a good UCLA team. They're playing on the road. It's game day. Everything is pointing towards Oregon. I understand that. But just as you match up the teams, I think it's an even matchup. In another game that probably will be close, UCLA going to have a chance to potentially pull off an upset. My pick, though, if I was going to pick this one, I would take Oregon. I think this Oregon team, I've said this before, I think there's a good chance that they're going to win out and possibly be in that playoff conversation. They're going to have to win this one, obviously, if they're going to win out. But home field advantage, that's going to be the difference for me. But again, one little play could change it. It's going to be close. UCLA could pull off the upset. How about UCF and East Carolina? This one's at 7:30 Eastern Time. UCF coming in here 5-1. East Carolina 4-3. UCF favored by 5 on the road. UCF's offense really been rolling with John Rice Plumlee. East Carolina is a team that's been up and down this year. We've seen them look really good, like the NC State game. Then they haven't looked great in other games. So it's really which East Carolina team shows up here. That's going to determine, I think, if this is a really good game or if UCF winds up winning fairly easily. Again, UCF has been rolling, only lost to Louisville. I would favor them here in this game as well, but I think it will be close. Home field advantage, maybe a difference. Maybe East Carolina pulls off the upset. We got BYU and Liberty. This one's at 3:30 Eastern Time. BYU favored by 6.5. This is another team that's just not very good. They're just not as good as they were supposed to be this year. I know there was a lot of hype for BYU. So many players coming back, so much production coming back. They've had some injuries, and it has not been a good season for them, sitting there at 4-3. We'll see if they can turn things around here. But it's a good Liberty team, explosive offense. They played Wake Forest down to the wire. I think it's going to be tough for BYU. I think they could lose again. I see again, they're favored by 6.5 on the road, which is surprising. I think Liberty has a really good chance to pull off this upset. And then finally, Texas and Oklahoma State at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. This is another huge game. Texas favored by 6, which surprised me on the road. Oklahoma State's a top 10 team. They only have the one loss to TCU last week on the road in a very close game. Texas has a couple of losses, didn't look especially great against Iowa State last week. So I was really surprised to see Texas favored in this game to begin with. I thought it might be the upset alert the other way. Absolutely, Oklahoma State can win this game. They can pull off this upset, no doubt about it. I know it's Quinn Ewers. Texas looked really good for the most part. But again, look at last week. Iowa State did a pretty good job on them. Oklahoma State's got a really good defensive line. I think this will be a really good game. And at home, don't count out Oklahoma State. They've got a really good shot, I think, to pull off this upset. And I think that's the most likely upset to happen here in Week 8. Did I miss one? Is there going to be a big upset that maybe I didn't talk about? Let me know which game you think that's going to be. Your thoughts on these 8 games. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.